First of all, we have to look at whether the mechanism of evolution itself is something that goes against the Torah. We have to look at the issue of common ancestry and whether we can be comfortable with the idea that all animals and species and plants and everything else came from one single-celled organism. And I also have some golden questions for you, which I asked you to remember that 200,000 year mark where Homo sapiens were created or existed, let's say. And we also have the question of the descent of man, that man appears to be just another animal. So let's start. Okay, what are our questions? The mechanism of evolution doesn't allow for a role of God to play. God plays no role. It's all just random mutations. We don't need God. Common ancestry, the simple meaning of the Torah implies acts of creation of each animal, not of common ancestry. It implies that God said, right, we want cows, boom, there's a cow. We want pigeons, boom, there's a pigeon. That's creation. That's what the Torah seems to imply. And the very last of those animals was man. There's man. Okay. The descent of man. It also implies, from an evolutionary perspective, that we are simply naked apes. We're simply animals with no hair on us, and we have an ability to talk and converse with one another a little bit different to animals, but ultimately we're just animals. Okay. The Torah implies something very different. So let's look. Let's find out if we're able to understand the mechanism of evolution in a Toradic way. This is from Psalm 104, Baruch Nafshi, which you're probably familiar with. It says in Baruch Nafshi a very interesting thing. He causes grass to sprout for the animals and vegetation, for the work of man to bring forth bread from the earth. Now, if I'm a scientist and I want to know how grass grows or any plant grows, what would I do? I would study a biology textbook, and what would I find? I'd find that, in fact, what happens is that you take a seed and you put it in the ground, and the seed starts to rot, and eventually you'll get a shoot coming up and a root going down, and the root will take in nutrients and water. But the fact that the plant is green, it contains something called chlorophyll, and as a result it will go through a process called photosynthesis that will allow the plant to create energy, and that will eventually manifest in the growth of the plant. So every blade of grass will grow that way. So what do I need God for? So why does the psalm say he causes the grass to sprout the animals? What's going on? What's God doing? So the idea behind this psalm is not that, if you were to analyze a little blade of grass, you'd see a little God there, like making it grow. Okay, we do say that every blade of grass has a malach, has an angel telling it to grow, but that's not what it means. What it means is that although there are natural processes that we can explain scientifically, God has to be part of the equation. God is there even in those things that we can explain, sort of pushing nature along, forcing nature to work. As we said last week, if God stopped creating for one moment, the whole of creation would stop existing. So we don't see the mechanism of evolution as being something that explains away God. That's not a problem for us. We see all of that, those random mutations or those processes of cell division and so on, being part and parcel of nature, for which God is simply a part of and is behind that. So that's not a terribly big problem. Rabbi Shimshon Hirsch explains it in the following way. He says all the laws of mechanisms, all the laws of mechanics, physics, chemistry, and physiology can no more do without the one who governs and guides the course of the universe, and according to Jewish teaching, also the life of the individual in accordance with his purposes. Than a living body breathing in accordance with the laws of physiology can do without the unfettered guidance of a human intelligence, or than a steamship operating in accordance with the laws of mechanics can do without the helmsman who guides it in accordance with his own free will. So God has to be there behind the scenes, pushing creation forward, creating all of the time, and allowing these processes to take place. What about common ancestry? The idea that we came from a single-celled life form, and the fact that the Torah implies that each creation was created in different ways. This is the Malbim. I want to point out, and I think it's only fair to point out, the Malbim is writing in the 1800s at the same sort of time that Darwin has come out with The Origin of Species, although that doesn't necessarily mean it is wrong. Creation progressed from level to level. Inanimate matter, plants, animals, and man. Everything that came earlier was a preparation for that which came later. After God established the luminaries without which life could not survive, he gave instruction for the creation of animal life. It is known that also in rising up through the ladder of stages, creation did not proceed in discontinuous leaps, but rather through intermediate stages. So the implication from the Malbim is that the idea of a gradual evolution from perhaps inanimate matter through single-cell, simple structures and organisms up to more complex organisms is not anathema to the Torah at all. We do have to then explain what the Torah means when it talks about the creation of each species and so on, or each species individually, but at least the creation of different animals and plants and so on. That's important. But the Malbim certainly doesn't see that as a kasha. However, what is a kasha is the following. So according to our tradition, Adam was created on the 6th day of creation. Okay, we actually, this is 1 year out of date, this slide. This occurred 5,774 years ago. Clearly, humans have existed for longer than that. Homo sapiens date back around 200,000 years. Other hominids date back much further. And if the science is correct, what is the creation of Adam referring to? In addition, according to the Torah, we must have all descended from one set of parents, Adam and Eve. Is there any evidence for this? Okay. The answer to the second question is not really. Although, if you're interested, there was an analysis to see if all human beings could have descended from one sort of set of parents. Although the conclusion is that if we did, it went back much further than 6,000 years. But as we'll see, that's not a problem. Because the bigger question is this. This number over here, 200,000 years. Because we mentioned last week that the first 6 days of creation could have been over a vast period of time. But we said that after the 6th day of creation, time proceeds as normal. And we work out this number of 5,774 years from the Torah itself, from the Torah and the prophets and the writings. In fact, there's a midrash called Seder Olam Rabbah, which calculates exactly when each event took place. And that brings us to this date of 5,774 years ago. That's why we're in the 5,774th year. That's where it comes from. So if that takes us back to the first Rosh Hashanah, which was the 6th day of creation, when Adam was created, what on earth is going on? We've got a huge bomba kasha, as we say in Yeshiva. Right? We've got a huge question. Man has been created 5,774 years ago, according to the Torah. And yet, from a scientific perspective, for which there is enormous amounts of evidence, Homo sapiens have existed for 200,000 years. So what does that imply the Torah is telling us about the creation of man? So this is my question. What was going on 5,774 years ago which defined the creation of Adam? So I'm going to reframe the question very slightly. Now, clearly, it can't have anything to do with art or language or intelligence, because this is cave art from 30,000 years ago. So Homo sapiens at that time, human beings let's say, who were just like us 30,000 years ago, were producing art like this. They had an ability to understand and to communicate in a very intimate way. What about tools? Well, here we have a selection of tools that date back 12,000 years. And in fact, I didn't show it in this presentation, but there were musical instruments that have been discovered dating back from similar periods. So human beings had, albeit very primitive tools and very primitive musical instruments and a very primitive art, but essentially they were very much like us. They might not have spoken English, right? But they could have conversed with us perhaps in their own way. They could have communicated with us. They certainly could have reproduced with us. So what's going on 5,774 years ago that the Torah is hell-bent on saying that that was the creation of Adam? So we're going to answer that question this way. Let's look at the descent of man. Let's look at man's place in the Torah, of what the Torah talks about when man was created. That's the place to look for the answer to this question. So the Torah says, and God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and they shall rule over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the heaven, and over the animals, over all the earth, and over all the creeping things that creep upon the earth. And God created man in his image, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them." Okay. Now, first of all, yes.
What's us and our?
You mean us and our?
Let us.
Okay, that's a good question. So there are a number of different answers to that. There are a number of different answers to that, which I'm not going to cover tonight, but you can ask me at the end. One of the answers that I think is Rashi's answer is he's talking to the Malachim, the angels as well, and that's fine. I'm not bothered by that. There's a much bigger problem on this side. Yeah.
I was going to say, first of all, God says, let us make man in our image. And then
Right.
he says to start with, he created man.
Yeah, it says Naaseh Odom Tzalmo Kidnusei. Right. Tzalmein Kidnusei.
So
Correct.
that standing, apart from verse 27, that standing was that man existed before then, and at verse 26, God said, let's make him into our image.
Naaseh Odom Tzalmo. Okay, I think.
Rather than he created, he
Right.
had man had already been created.
Oh,
This
very
was the point where he made him into our
Very
image.
good. Very good. Very excellent. So let's. Huh?
Was he given a soul at that point?
Very good. So let's see what's going on. Sforno, who is, by the way, writing, again, take a note of the year 1550. This is 300 years before Darwin. He says the following: God said, "Let us make man." He then endowed his heavenly host with the power to impart the heavenly image to the subject which was prepared for it, i.e. man. Look what he says next. Adam. What was Adam? A type of creature from the types of animals that I've created, and that his name is Adam, as it is said, and Adam became a living soul. Sforno picks up on a very delicate nuance in the verse, which you've picked up yourself, which is that it appears from the verse that this idea of the creation of Adam was not a new physical creation in the way that we're used to thinking of it. That the creature already existed, the creature called Adam was already in existence, and this creation of Adam, so to speak, was like an upgrade. Okay? It was like an upgrade to make Adam into the image of God. By the way, let's just go back. One of the things that I often pick up on when I'm speaking to a Chosin and a Kala, I think I even mentioned it last week, is that originally Adam was created in the image of God, which implies that he was created both male and female. Okay? The Medrash has all sorts of different explanations as to what that would have looked like. The reality is, however, that this is clearly not talking about something physical. This is talking about something spiritual, metaphysical, whatever it happens to be, because the Torah isn't implying that Adam was originally physically both a male and a female, or perhaps he was, don't know. But the implication is that we as men and women are, although we're individual human beings, the creature that was created in the image of God was in fact a combination of male and female. And that's why when a couple get married, the two parts of that whole come back together. That's the purpose of marriage. It doesn't mean that we physically stick them together. They can't be one physical being together. But spiritually, the neshama of a husband and wife are bound together. That's what Kiddushin is. That's what a wedding ceremony does. Kiddushin, okay, we don't have a word for marriage in Hebrew. We have a word Kiddushin, which comes from the word to make something holy. Okay, to make it holy. It means that we bring these two neshamas, these two souls together, and we combine them together, which means that the idea of till death do us part is not a Jewish idea, because a Jewish neshama, when it's married to another Jewish neshama, is kept together even after death. Okay, which means that after a couple pass away, their neshamas are stuck together like forever. Okay, which is one of my rebbeim said is very good news for some of us and not such great news for other people. Just to pick up on the nuances, though.
What did you say?
Huh? Careful what I say. It's very good news for me, that's for sure. Yeah.
What happens to the second one?
Oh, okay, that's a good question. But let's not go there today.
Can I just go back?
Sorry.
If I go back to the previous slide.
There you go. Yeah.
The word they, and they shall rule.
Sorry, they shall.
And they shall rule.
Yeah.
Now, there's two ways of interpreting that. It's either a prophecy going forwards.
Yeah.
There will be more than one of them.
Yeah.
Or at that stage, there is more than one.
Good question. Very interesting question. I think what you're touching on is a question that I do not yet have an answer to, which we're going to go on and flesh this out a little bit more, but I think you're already kind of at the conclusion, if Adam was the first hominid, let's say, that was upgraded to being a human being with a soul, does that mean that there were other hominids in existence at the time? Well, absolutely yes. Does that mean, therefore, that there could be other human beings today, like missed out on that weren't descendants from Adam? Could be, don't know. But certainly that's an interesting nuance in that verse.
So there's a question actually,
Yeah.
my Hebrew grammar's not that good.
Okay.
Vayivra,
Where, sorry?
verse 27.
Here, Vayivra, and
Does it actually say he created or he had created?
no,
or
he created.
he's specifically in a perfect past?
Yeah. Vayivra is
I always thought verbs.
no, it's because, just to give you a little grammar lesson, if you took that vav away, Yivra would be in the future tense, but that vav switches it to the past tense. Okay, that's a feature of
But
biblical Hebrew.
it couldn't be read as he had created.
No, no. Vayivra, and he created, and God created, for sure. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so Rabbi Isaac Bernstein Zatzal wrote, in fact, in one of the Daf HaShavuos of old, this summary. According to the Sforno, there was no new creation on that sixth day, only the elevation of one of the species created in an earlier stage. This is confirmed by the Sforno's next comment, man is a species, which I already created, says God, whose name is Adam, as it says, and man became a living creature. In other words, man started his existence as a member of the animal kingdom. At a later stage, God endowed the animal man with intellect and free will. What does that look like? Okay. Chief Rabbi Hertz writes, I'm not going to read the whole thing out, but essentially that the purpose of the Torah is not, again, it's not to describe a scientific process, but to describe what man is becoming. That it's not so much the descent of man, but the ascent of man. That man is now gaining a likeness with God. That having been simply a physical being, like one of the other animals, man now has a godly element to him, which we call the neshama. And the Torah is explicit that all animals have a nefesh of some sort. They have some sort of soul that animates them, but only to the point that they are living. We, however, have something beyond that, and we're going to look at that right now. This is another description of the creation of man, and this probably, one of my rebbes said, if you could say such a thing, that this is probably the most important verse in the entire Torah. Chas v'shalom. Every verse is important, but he said it, not me. Right. The verse says the following: and the Lord God formed man of dust from the ground. What's that? What's dust from the ground? That's physical matter. Right? The elements. Physical matter. We were physical beings in the same way that other animals were physical beings. But what happened next? And he breathed into his nostrils the soul of life, and man became a living soul, something that animals did not have. And how does Onkelos, the Roman proselyte who translated the Torah into Aramaic, how does he understand this word nefesh chaya? It translates as ruach memalala. Now for years, I thought ruach memalala must mean it says a speaking spirit. So that means that man suddenly had the ability to speak. Well, that doesn't make any sense either. Because communication goes beyond speech. Animals communicate with one another. Animals have the ability of what would be a very primitive speech, they can still communicate. So what is this talking about? What is ruach memalala? Okay, this is a modern day essay, but let's read it. It's very, very beautiful. The nefesh, ruach, and neshama are three parts of the soul. Okay, just to explain outside a little bit, again, this is a little Kabbalistic, but the nefesh is a part of the soul which is animalistic. It's a very base part of the soul, which simply animates. The neshama, from the word neshima, from the word breath, is the higher level of the soul, and the ruach connects the two. So the nefesh is the lowest part which animates the body. The neshama, from the word neshima, is the special soul given to us by God. Animals don't have such a soul. The ruach, meaning wind, connects the nefesh and the neshama. The Torah's version of the verse uses the root yatzar to give shape or form to something that already exists. God shapes man, breathes into him a neshama, a spiritual soul, and existence in heavenly realms. This transforms man into a living nefesh. Being a nefesh alone does not make man unique. Animals also have a nefesh. The relevant term here would seem to be that the nefesh of man is chaya, it's living. The ruach, the seat of will, must be self-aware. Conscious thought comes from the awareness of our thoughts, including our awareness of that awareness itself, and so on in an infinite regress. Free will comes from being able to monitor one's thoughts and edit them based on judging what one monitors. So, to put it in a nutshell, this neshama, this godly soul, this spark of godliness in each one of us, is that mechanism by which we have the ability to rise above those regular, base, animalistic tendencies that all animals have, and not do them, and say, I'm not going to simply act like an animal, I'm going to act like a human being and rise above that. So every animal, just like us, has a drive, has an animalistic drive to eat, to sleep, to reproduce. Only human beings have the ability, the executive function, to be able to override that, and to be able to overcome those drives. And that's because we're connected to God. And the more that we do, the more mitzvahs that we do, the more Torah that we learn, and so on, strengthens that connection and that ability to override those animalistic desires, which refine us as human beings. So Rabbi Yochanan said that Adam and Chava were created as a 20-year-old. Remember last week we spoke about the Omphalos hypothesis? They were created as 20-year-olds. So that was very interesting in terms of the fact that they were created as fully formed human beings. Why 20? Why the age 20? Anybody know? What happens at age 20? Everyone knows about bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah.
Theoretical maturity.
Great. Let's have a look. This is taken from the Torah. In the desert, your corpses shall fall, your entire number, all those from the age of 20 and up who were counted because you complained against me. Why 20 and up?
The survivors.
No, different. Look, how many of the years a man? 70. Subtract 20 for those years, you don't punish him, 50 remain. Okay? Don't worry about the fact that it's 70 and 50 remaining. The important thing is that the first 20 years of a person's life, one is not necessarily judged for things that one does wrong. Okay? After the age of 20, you are now what we call chayiv in oynesh. You become a person who can be punished for the sins that you do, even though at the age of 13 or 12 for girls, you actually become obligated in mitzvot. From the age of 20, that's the age when a person can be punished for things that they do wrong. And when we say punished, by the way, I use that word a little loosely. We don't mean punish like, God's waiting around the corner for you to eat that cheeseburger and he's going to whack you over the head. It doesn't quite work like that. But it means that the mitzvahs that you do and the averas that you do have an effect after the age of 20. Okay, Rashi says, subtract 20 for the words who don't punish him, for we find in the generation of the desert that God only punished those who were above the age of 20. As it's written, all those above the age of 20 are up, were counted because you complained against me. Okay? So, what has God created in Adam and Eve as 20-year-olds? He's created fully formed beings who are now not only obligated in commandments and everything else, but also are relevant to the idea of punishment. Okay? They're fully formed both physically and spiritually as well. So you mentioned this point before. I put this slide up because I always like to ask the question, well, when I was a kid, we always believed it was Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, because that's the story you read about, and who else was around at the time? Well, let's look at the Torah. Cain said to the Lord, this is after he kills Abel, is my iniquity too great to bear? Behold, you have driven me today off the face of the earth, and I shall be hidden from before you, and I will be a wanderer and an exile in the land, and it will be that whoever finds me will kill me. Who's he talking about? Who's going to find him? If it's just Adam and Eve, Abel's dead, it's Cain, Seth, we know about Seth, who else is there? So it must be that the Torah recognizes, a little subtly perhaps, that there were other, perhaps hominids around at the time that could have killed him, and implies that, it doesn't talk about them as such, because again, it's not relevant, but it does imply in a very sort of roundabout way that there were other people, other hominids there at the time. Okay.
With the same intellect as
we don't know. Not necessarily. Could be, maybe not.
My question is, why is this not taught? I mean, I have a kid at home who's
right.
5,774, okay. And nothing else. And he came to me and he says, there's no such thing as dinosaurs.
Okay.
You can't, I mean, I've also had the same problem of relating creation in 6 days.
Yeah. I think we all do. I think that the point is,
why is it taught like that then?
The problem is that, it's a good question. I think one of the answers is that, firstly, there is a history and a tradition going back a long way that there are other, perhaps, answers to this that are more dogmatic, which the Torah should be learned more literally. And the danger is, something that I alluded to last week, that if you can learn the Torah in a non-literal way, then it could imply that perhaps halakha is also non-literal. You know, that we don't have to really believe that there was Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. We don't really have to believe that Moses spoke to God. We don't really, and it suddenly becomes, a little bit like not orthodox anymore. So there is a danger, and it could be that perhaps, I don't know, maybe from a policy perspective, that it's not a good idea to teach children in that way. And this is a very complex thing to teach.
It's dogmatic.
Okay, maybe it is, and I, being someone who has children at a very Haredi school, I do understand. I understand that mindset. I think the problem is that when children mature into adults and start to be confronted by science and questions of science, because it creates cognitive dissonance. When you have science saying one thing and Torah saying something else, you've got a problem, you've got a clash. So something's got to give. And if we don't want the Torah to give, then it must be the science that goes. So that's why you end up with religious kids going to biology class and saying, well, you can teach us evolution, but we don't believe in it. Right? Because it seems to be a clash against the Torah. My personal perspective is much more complex than that. And it is difficult to teach the subtleties of what the Torah is saying, and it's also, if it's not popular, then it's also difficult to get the message across. You sort of stand out as a little bit funny. Like, I'm not sure, in the Haredi world, if I gave this talk to a more Haredi audience, I don't know if I'd be shocked, but I'd certainly, I would probably jeopardize my kids' shidduchim. I realize this is being video at the moment. I would challenge others to ask questions there. And what I would hope is that if someone would disagree with what I say, and by the way, what I'm saying is not particularly radical. I mean, this is the Malbim, this is Rashi, this is Shimshon Fulesh. These people were even Jewish. They were normal commentators of the Torah. These were from people. I'm not bringing some funky Kabbalist from somewhere. This is all genuine stuff. So if that's the case, then why are we so afraid of it? And change takes a long time, and it has to be managed properly and with a community that, it's not just in the Haredi community, it's in the whole community. To understand these very subtle ideas is not easy, but that's why I'm here.
Is there perhaps not a very simple answer to it on the basis that they learn the Torah? And that's when you're at Jewish school or Cheder or whatever, right. You are there to learn Torah.
Yes.
If you're learning Torah, you're going to learn what is in the Torah.
Yes.
There's nothing in the Torah about science, really.
Right.
It's Torah. And therefore that's why I think that it's a very narrow way of learning, but that's historically going to be that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, and I wouldn't be too critical of the Haredi community either. I think it's true across the Jewish community that when Torah is taught, it's taught on a very basic level. And that's understandable because, let's face it, most people will understand Torah on a very basic level, and it takes a lot to pick it apart. You have to know a lot to be able to find answers to these questions. It's not simple. Yeah.
It's a double question here. Well, going back to the last one.
Yeah.
Did the sixth day actually take 24 hours? Or was it a longer period?
Okay.
But linked with that, when he said, let us make man in our image.
Yes.
Making implies a process, not just that.
Yeah.
So, did Adam himself evolve to become, spiritual at least, in God's image, rather than it becoming, there's somebody, another look at him,
Right.
you can recreate.
Right. So that's
the other side of it, making man and woman. It appears from when we're talking about evolution, you require sexual reproduction to actually evolve. Aphids don't evolve, they remain the same because
apart from random mutations. Right, correct. Everything that you've said is correct, and I think this last slide will answer some of it in terms of the different language that we use for creation. And you've picked up on the verb la'asot means to make. You're right. That implies making something that's out of material that already exists. Like the word we've seen yatsar, that he created, means forming something. The word bara, I'll tell you a question in a moment, the word bara, base resh aleph, implies a creation ex nihilo, and there are a number of commentators which pick this up, that there are only a certain number of times that the word is used. It's used in the creation of the universe, Bereshis bara Elokim es hashamayim v'es haaretz. It's also used in the creation of life. Okay, it's implied in the creation of life, but life itself, from inanimate, chemicals to a single-celled organism, it needed God to be there to give it that push, and also the creation of man. Okay.
So is that the earth being formed?
Correct, exactly, yes.
It's just that it's the way Ian was using the word make, because even though you're making it from something, it doesn't necessarily imply that it's a long time in making. It could be making as actually giving a spirit to it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we don't know the details.
Terminology, isn't it?
It is terminology, but those words are key, and that is why you cannot study the Torah by looking at a translation. You cannot understand Torah by unless you delve into the exquisite sensitivity that each word holds, that each letter holds, of the different verbs that are being used and the way that those are constructed. It's all, that's what our thousands of years of commentary is there to do. It's there to pick up on those nuances and to explain them, to describe what the Torah is really saying. And again, it feeds into the whole idea that what's the purpose of the Torah? Is the purpose of the Torah to teach us about some scientific idea of how God created the world, or is it there to teach us something that we can actually use to live our lives? And to know that man is created in a different way to the animals gives us the responsibility to realize that we do have free will. We do have the ability to refine ourselves beyond being simple animals. And one day, well, perhaps I didn't bring it in these slides, there's some very interesting studies looking at free will. They did a study where they took two different groups of people. One of them, they gave them texts, I don't know if it was exactly this text, but a text like, Richard Dawkins, that implies there is no free will, you're just an animal and everything else. And another group of people, they gave a text which implies, you do have free will. And they gave them tasks to do which involved, in a sort of very tacit way, a subversive way almost, they were analysing how those people responded to certain moral issues. And they found within the group that had been reading about the idea of not having free will, they behaved in a much more self-centered way than the group that had sort of read about having free will and thinking about free will. They behaved in a much more moral way. So just the idea of free will, the idea of knowing that we have a connection to God is enough to help us refine ourselves in a positive way. One last question and we'll move on. Yeah. Sorry, behind you.
Yeah, I have a problem with this, not because I think it's bad, but because I think it's being misused by other people, perhaps for more sinister ends. For example, I saw a program when I was in the States, taught by a Christian fundamentalist, who basically said Adam was the first man, there were other people around at the time in human form, therefore they were not men, they were part of the animal kingdom. The next leap is to say Adam was the ancestor of the white Aryan races, therefore the other people who are the blacks, the Indians, the Asians, and the Semites, that includes us,
right,
are from a pre-Adamite sect, i.e. not human, not with human souls. That was then used to justify slavery, to justify apartheid, to justify anti-Semitism. The sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was said to be humans mixing with non-humans.
Yeah.
Interestingly, I also heard a rabbi giving the opposite. He was saying that we were the ones who were human and nobody else was.
Right.
So either way, it's a very racist theory.
Right. Well, this theory doesn't say that. That's
No,
other
it's
people
interpreted that way.
using what we have here for their own ends,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
clearly is wrong. But that doesn't mean that this is wrong. That means that we have a challenge here to say, well, if Adam wasn't the only man and there could have been other hominids, where did they end up? Because my experience of the world is if you look at pretty much every human being you meet, yes, you'll meet some people who are perhaps a little evil, perhaps, for sure evil has existed in the world, but that can't be explained by saying that someone doesn't have a soul. That's not what it would look like. Even if you take, someone with enormous amounts of evil, a person can be very evil, very calculated, very intelligent, and very refined. Look at the Nazis. Very refined individuals. Very cultured, very in touch with the modern world, but boy, did they have evil. So we can't relate evil or being a lesser person to this. That doesn't work, right? Which is why my reaction to what you've said is that you will always be able to find something in the Torah that will justify racism or justify being homophobic or justify all sorts of nasty behavior. Right? There's always something
If
there.
you take Darwin a step further, it goes on to racism.
It doesn't, it doesn't. It does if you're a racist. If you're somebody who believes that there are groups of human beings who are lesser than you, then of course it does, but it shouldn't. Why should it do that? Why should it apply?
Because you have the ability to think in any direction.
Yeah,
And your focus will fall on certain things that you will explore in your mind. You will reject racism, but you will think about it.
No, I don't think about it at all. I have to say I really don't. I think most normal human beings who have interactions with non-Jews or with blacks and whites and so on and so forth recognize quite clearly that trying to generalize about anybody is pretty stupid. It's pretty base. And if you are a racist, then yes, you can look at theories
But
like
you
this.
will focus on it.
Yeah, but
It doesn't stop you thinking and having free will.
But that doesn't make people racist. It just
No.
means there are people who are racist, and they will use this sort of theory to bolster their views.
But somebody asked the question earlier this evening, well, who were these other people? What happened to them?
We don't know.
We don't know. So they will say, well, it's easy, they were black people.
But that's ridiculous. That first of all, that's a leap of logic, and secondly,
It is, yeah.
it's ludicrous to suppose that because there is no mechanism to measure how, if a person actually behaves like an animal. What would that look like? What would it look like that a human being just behaves like an animal? Well, there are people who simply respond to physical impulses. No, there aren't.
Could you not argue that those others were, for instance, talking about Neanderthals, so they were known to exist at the same time as Homo sapiens?
Well, we certainly know they couldn't be Neanderthals because they for sure died out, and we're saying that in this period, 200,000 years, that they're.
We continue, they died out.
Okay. Well, they inbred with Homo sapiens. You're right, but what we could say very clearly is that the reason that we survived is because we had that spiritual element that was there to drive us along, and we don't know the answer. But what we certainly can't do is start to say, well, it must be that particular group lived on and they don't have souls and that's why they're that particular group. That's ridiculous. That is ludicrous. That is demonstrably ludicrous from either side. But to say that we do know scientifically that there were species which died out, species of hominids which died out, for which we don't have a very good explanation. Could it be that those species were the species that were simply animals that didn't have souls? Could be. Don't know. I don't know because we have no mechanism of testing it. We don't even have the words to describe a theory that would explain that. All we know is that from our perspective, the description in the Torah is the description of the spiritual upgrade of a pre-existing hominid. The fact, the details that there could have been other hominids existing at the time that don't exist anymore is very interesting. But again, the Torah is not going to describe it, because it doesn't have any relevance to us. Okay, I'll take some other questions because I think this has sparked a lot of interest.
I was just going to say again that possibly because we have the sugar and the additional soul and intelligence, we've just out-survived it.
Yeah, that's what I alluded to. Yeah, correct. Okay, at the back of it.
Is there any deeper explanation about the creation of woman from Adam's rib?
See, again, I think the creation of woman from the rib is a very interesting one, because everyone knows that a tzela is translated as a rib, but the word tzela, in fact, in other places in the Torah, definitely does not mean rib. Okay? It means a side, and we understand the translation of that process as that there was God, who is both male and female, creating a creature that was both male and female, and that feminine side was removed to create two separate beings which could reproduce. Okay? That's what we teach the Chosin and the Kalas. Now, again, physically, I'm not sure what that would look like, but certainly spiritually, we do know what that looks like. So, again, the Torah is there to teach us something beyond the physical, something spiritual. Okay. Yeah, and then, yeah.
Just to fit what you're saying, it strikes me that what happens when Adam exists, God will say, like, I finally found somebody on earth who's going the way I want him to go. He'll choose a all the same hominids, all the same things, all the same people, men, females knocking around. I'll pick this guy, a bit like Adam was later on and revealed it for himself. But this time we give him the spark to pick one person and a woman to do it, and then he starts off. That would mean that their children can then find someone else to marry off the same hominid. And then later on, as people move around and people seem to be marrying all over the place, obviously not a massive difference in species or subhuman, if you like. So all this argument about the blacks and yellow, it's all the same. There may be different colours, sunburns in one place or whatever. But the thing is, what spark has been created is that one, the idea is that Adam is the first person that is now aware of a God that exists and what is wanted for him and what.
I mean, one of the proofs against the arguments that the sort of racist arguments that you made, is the story of Noah, which I wouldn't bring as a proof because I'm not quite sure I understand it entirely. But what's certainly true is that the story of Noah implies that in fact we are all descendants from Noah. They're all human beings. Now Noah was for sure a descendant of Adam. Okay, so if the story of Noah can be read literally, which is that everything else ceased to exist on earth except for Noah and his family, then his three sons, Shem, Ham and Yafet, were in fact the seeds that sowed three different types of people in the world. And the Meforshim do go into detail as to where each sort of nation that exists at that time came from which son. Okay, but again, I mean, this idea that I wouldn't even credit those sorts of theories with a response, to be honest. Okay, I'll take one more question, then I think I can't even remember how many slides we have left. Probably like one or two. But yes.
So, in my view, evil is defined in the Torah further on.
Yes.
In terms of mind. Therefore, any theory around creation is almost irrelevant because God defines evil further on. And the evil stems from that, where the tribe. So that I'm not concerned about. But going back to the original element, the definition is not being solid. And that is the definition, difference, defining difference. It doesn't necessarily define into actual terms.
Sorry, it doesn't define?
Well, the 5,700. It doesn't exactly. That particular element doesn't define the gap.
Which gap?
The gap between the minus 200,000
yeah.
and the 5,000. At that point, I don't think the link is necessarily fully there, is it?
No, I think it is. I think that the idea of the creation of man 5,724 years ago, which was the spiritual upgrade that we described, is there. That's fine. And I can then be quite comfortable with the idea that 200,000 years before that, or going back the rest of the time, 200,000 years before that, there were Homo sapiens that physically were the same. That's absolutely fine. I'm quite happy with that. And I've got other problems, but that point alone, I think is okay. You don't like it?
Only that, I believe it.
Okay.
There isn't an issue. I guess in my mind, God could have chosen any time.
Okay, so why was it 5,000?
That's why I'm saying.
Okay, I'll take a question at the end. I just want to finish off and going through the sort of summary, which in fact you can read for yourselves. We've understood that God acts through natural processes observed by scientists, so we don't have to worry too much about the mechanism of evolution. Life developed gradually according to the Malbim, so that's also okay, although in fact now there are theories that evolution in fact happens in stages, punctuated evolution rather. That's a very interesting idea. Again, we're not going to go into it tonight as such, but the Malbim at least allows us to believe in that. While mankind may be physically similar to ape-like animals, he's qualitatively different, as we've said before, that's Rabbi Hertz. Also, man is different to the animals because we have an intellect, a consciousness, let's say, a sort of a moral consciousness, a moral compass that defines us. Okay, and the intellect is related to the neshama, the godlike soul which is unique to man, breathed into Adam at creation. Okay, that's the summary we have so far. Also, again, to re-emphasize the point that this is from Rav Dessler, that the Torah is there to teach us concepts that we can grasp. It's to teach us ideas that will help us to live our lives as better human beings, as better Jews, not to give us a lesson in science. That's a very simple idea. What I hope to have done, again, is to flesh out some of that idea in this evening's lecture. Just to conclude by saying, just a reminder, that next week, as all the Rabbonim are away at the Rabbinical Conference, unfortunately we won't have a lecture next week. However, in 2 weeks' time, we're going to take a slightly different track, and we're going to look at a number of philosophical ideas in Judaism, the idea of divine providence, of how God in fact interacts with the world, and use science to help explain that. We're going to use the science of chaos theory to help explain concepts of divine providence, and perhaps even approach some rather sensitive issues on why certain things, bad things, perhaps happen to good people and vice versa, and try to sort of unpick some of those very sensitive issues as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this evening. If you have any further questions, of course, you're welcome to ask afterwards. I also have a couple of cards if you want to take those away. I'm happy to get emails. If you want copies of the PDFs of the slides, I'm happy to give those to you as well, provided that you don't share them with anybody else. Otherwise, have a very good evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much for delivering in understandable terms and, inverted commas, simple language that you can understand. Although there are a couple of scientists.
I'm sure there are.
Many of us aren't. And giving us a stimulating, thought-provoking presentation. Most grateful and look forward to coming back after the rabbinical fun fight next week.
Thank you very much.